Welcome to the 4th Annual Gonzaga Student Leadership Symposium. Fabulous. It's really fun to see you all here, fun to see alumni here and potential students here and all of you here and your guests. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's Kim Gambrell. I have the pleasure of serving in the doctoral program for leadership studies. So if you haven't harassed me yet, please do. For those of you who have, thanks for that. I appreciate it. Just a couple of quick announcements, and then I'm going to turn it over to the gurus and the powers that be. First, a couple of things. We are running the symposium on a Facebook page, so please like us at Gonzaga University Leadership Symposium. We've got several folks that are actually going to do continuous updates on the Facebook page. So say if you're in one session, you want to see what's going on in another session, that's a great way to do it. The other way is, of course, Twitter, because we want to be technology savvy, right? So the Twitter one is #GULeads. Okay? Please continue to wear your name tags, bring your programs, all of those good things. And as fun, we have multiple door prizes or raffle prizes going on throughout the symposium. So we're going to encourage you to show up at the strategic points. This is one of them. Dinner with Howard Bihar is one of them. Tomorrow, when we're all done, with wine and chocolate and all those good things is one of them. So please join us, okay? Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our dean. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, raffle. Yeah, we should do the raffle first. Yeah.
One.
So, Bill, do you want to model what we're...
I feel like Vanna White. Jennifer Talbot.
All right.
Here.
One of Jim's books. Congratulations. Say yours. Shanna. There you are. All right. And for the record, Jim Kouzes was kind enough to sign them for us. Thank you. Congratulations. Yeah, so if you haven't noticed, we have some wonderful speakers. Not just you, of course you, but also Jim Kouzes, Howard Bihar, and then we have a wonderful panel, as well as our very own Larry Spears tomorrow as well. So please, we've got great things for you. Look forward to you being here and enjoying yourselves and have a good time. So, School of Professional Studies, our Dean, Joe Albert. Thank you.
One time I was talking to the city of Spokane, the mayor invited me, and he brought me up on stage, and it was like, 1,000 people there, and finally I was just about to start, and somebody in the audience said, "Hey, what about the raffle?" And so I did the raffle, and the raffle ended, and Mayor West at the time, he said, "Joe, come on back up." And with that, half the crowd left. So I got just then, I had this really serious flashback. I'll be okay in a minute. In your programs, there's pictures of these great people, great looks. And I want to thank the committee, from Ken to Rochelle to Chris, Josh, Joanne, Melissa, Faith, Stacy, Bill, Michael, and Christine. Thank you to the committee for, this is pretty outstanding. So Kim said you got about 2.5 minutes, so this is going to be really quick. And I told Jim I didn't want to step on his toes. So, and he's the draw here. So I'm going to keep it really quick. But I want to just share a couple thoughts about leadership and sort of as a way to kind of get this thing going. In January, I traveled to Northern Ireland, Dr. Caputo's class on dialogue and peace building, and to observe that, but also to kind of get a sense of Northern Ireland and the kind of the work being done there. And during the course of my stay, I had a chance to interact with a number of grassroots organizers who are really doing true peace building work there. One of the people I met was a woman named Maureen Hetherington, who is humble as all get out, one of the kindest people, but a true leader. And her husband, Doogie, and about, I forget how many years ago now, he was a law enforcement person, and he lost his arm in a car bomb explosion. And I got to know her through the week, I said, everyone here is scarred by the troubles. And she said, yeah, we are, but we got to move forward, you know. I said, will you ever get justice, you know, for what they did to your husband? She goes, it's about peace. It's not about justice for us. It was a very interesting observation for me. And she just became one of these people that I just absolutely admired because of her work. She introduced me the second day I was there to a guy named Richard Moore. And Richard is another organizer. He had lost his sight when he was 10 years old. A British bullet hit him in the head and blinded him. And I got to spend a little time with him. And through the course of his life, I forget how many years after the incident had occurred, he met the soldier that actually had blinded him. And they reconciled and have become friends and actually present on peace and reconciliation. Quite powerful. And somehow the Dalai Lama heard about this and actually came to Derry to meet Richard. And now Richard and he are actually very, as you can tell, pretty great friends. It's just a riot to see, you see these pictures and hear Richard talk about his holiness. It's just great. But Richard's another person in terms of his humility, his inclusiveness, his kindness, and most of all his desire to see people reconcile, to bring people together. It was really striking to me. There's still trouble there. There's still challenges, I think. There's still walls. But yet they chip away every day at those walls in their own way and very effectively. And I was kind of left humbled by it, quite honestly, and struck by it. A couple of the things they work on is shared remembering, bringing former combatants together to share their stories, to hear each other's stories and build peace in that way. Very creative, I thought, very powerful, and really trying to mutually understand each other's narratives, which isn't easy. It's great work they're doing there. A few weeks ago, I traveled to Colombia. I feel like such an international name dropper now. And those of you that know me know like how unlikely that is, somebody like me doing that. Got to spend a little over a week at Javierana University in Cali and Bogota. And one of the people I met there, Dr. Manuel Munoz, and I met him through a translator. We spent a couple hours together. My God, what a guy. Once again, another true peace builder. He was involved with the peace accords, which have been in the process for years. And he's actually negotiating. The day we were there, he was actually working with a guerrilla group that were going to free up their territory to open it up to guerrillas that would disarm as part of the peace process, and they would be safe to go there. And as we met, he got called out, and he said, well, got to go back, more negotiations. And humble guy, once again, very inclusive, most interested in us. There's a kindness in his heart, but also a real sort of commitment to peace and justice. And in every case, I was struck once again, as I was in Northern Ireland. And he was very interested, actually, what was going on. This fall, as you know, we had a visit from the Pope, and I was just struck by his own leadership. And there was an article in Time magazine, I think the title was, the kind of global leader we need at this point in time, and I think it's true. And again, it's that sense of inclusiveness, of kindness, mercy, peace building. And I think that is the kind of leadership we need most. So this weekend is really about exploring edges of leadership, frontiers, boundaries. Thank you all for the work you've done, for the research you've done, and we're very excited to kind of let this dialogue occur, and that's really what it is this weekend. So I'm excited to be here and to hear some of the work you're doing. I get a chance, before I run out of time here, to introduce this guy. And you can read his bio, it's in your programs. I think what I'm most humbled by with Jim is his kindness, but also his humility. And the extent of his achievements are remarkable, actually. But in a very soft, gentle way, he sort of challenges us to think, supports us. He, along with Howard Bihar and some other, we have a great advisory board for our school. They're kind enough to serve on that board to help us provide direction and so forth. And it's really been an honor getting to know both of them, and you'll hear a little more from Howard later tonight. But as far as Jim goes, it's just been truly a privilege and an honor to have him here. So with that, Jim Kouzes, please welcome.
Thank you. While I mic myself up.
Yep.
Thank you, Dean. While I get mic'd up, we're recording this. I'll tell you a story about how I got started in doing all this. I came back from 2 years in the Peace Corps, where I had spent time in Turkey teaching, and I wanted to continue to do something back here in the U.S. So I joined Community Action Program Training Institute, which was an organization devoted to providing training to those who were involved in working with the poorest of the poor around the country. And part of our training, I've related this story to some of you earlier, was to work with people in small communities around the South and the Southwest United States. So one morning we arrived in a small town in East Texas. Any of you ever been to East Texas? A few of you have. So if you know East Texas, it's the green part of Texas near the border of Arkansas. And the venue was not some really wonderful auditorium like this one, but a local church. So if I'm in East Texas, you're in East Texas in a local church, what's the denomination likely to be? It's a Baptist church. So I asked the person who was facilitating this where we were going to do our training, and she said, it's going to be in the sanctuary. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in the sanctuary or of any, Southern Baptist church, but this is my first experience in the sanctuary of a Southern Baptist church. And so I asked where we would do the training from, and she said, well, from the pulpit, of course. So I went to the pulpit of this Southern Baptist church to begin to train, and I was about 2 or 3 sentences into the goals and objectives, and something happened. Now, if you're at the pulpit of a Southern Baptist church in East Texas and something happens, what do you think happened? You're speaking at this. I guess none of you have either been into a Southern Baptist church either, but if you had, they said, Amen, or preach on, or praise the Lord. So if at any time during this 45 minutes I have with you, if you feel so moved, just go right ahead. That's how I got started in this work. And can you all hear me in the back all right? You hear me all right? Perfect. If you can't, just ask me to speak up. And I do have a mic if we really need it. So this is what I'd like to just chat with you about briefly. I'd like to share with you why it's so important that we spend some time on leadership and leadership development, what the evidence is about leadership capability. I want to share with you 5 fundamentals of becoming the best leader you can be. It's really appropriate. We're having a research symposium in a leadership studies program because it is about that. How do we learn to become the best we can be? And lastly, to provide you with a few action items for each of those fundamentals. So does that sound like a useful way to spend the 40 minutes I have left? Thank you. Thank you. Quick learners. So let me just say a couple of words about the world needing more exemplary leaders. Debbie Coleman, whom I first met in Santa Clara, California, where she was Vice President of Manufacturing for Apple Computer at the time, was one of the first people we ever wrote about who told us her personal best leadership story when she was Director of Manufacturing for Apple. And I've stayed in touch with Debbie. She's now a venture capitalist out of Portland, Oregon. And I asked her recently because we were writing this new book and I wanted to quote her again. I said, you said this 25 years ago, would you still say the same thing today? And she said, absolutely. And it's even more important to me now than it was when I first said it. And that is, I think good people deserve good leadership. The people I lead deserve the best. And that is the attitude of every exemplary leader we've ever talked to. That they believe in their hearts that the people they lead deserve the best leadership they can possibly get, and that because of that, they can never stop learning to lead and be a better leader. Leadership is not a course. Leadership development is not a course. It's not a weekend. It's not even a year or 2 years. It's a lifelong endeavor. And what I hope you're about in this leadership studies program is not just viewing it as I get my degree and then I move on, but that I am engaged now in a lifelong study as a student of leadership, because that's the way the best leaders in the world look at it. What do you think is the most frequently asked question that Barry Posner and I get about leadership? Can anybody be a leader? A version of that question. The question we get asked is, are leaders born or made? Now what's interesting is I've never been asked the question, are managers born or made? And by not making that assumption, there are thousands of MBA programs around the world that have been developed, but how many schools of leadership do we have? Very, very few. Fortunately, you're at one that is soon to name itself that way. I'm already making a public announcement how to beat you to the punch here. But you are involved in one of the very few schools of leadership as far as I know, in the world. One of the very few. Only the military academies make their mission to develop and train leaders. So why is it that we have this question mark, are leaders born or made? There seems to be an assumption somewhere hidden in there that maybe it's not something I can learn. Maybe it's something that you either have or you don't. Now, I don't think that's your attitude, but that's the question we get asked most often. And because that's the question we get asked most often, Barry and I wanted to explore another question, which was what percentage of people in the world demonstrate no leadership ability whatsoever? 0. Score at the lowest end. In our cases, we use the leadership practices inventory, which some of you are familiar with, in order to determine the answer to that question. So what do you guess is the number? And I'll give you 6 options, which hold up a finger for the number you think is correct up here. 1 of 6. I guess you'd have to hold 2 hands if you believe it's 6. But what's the number? I see a 3. I see mostly 1s. For those of you who are holding your hands up, mostly 1s, a couple of 3s, 2s. Well, here is the answer. 0.00013% of people in the world have no leadership ability whatsoever. That decimal is not in the wrong place. It is 13/10,000ths of a percent. So if you are a 100-person organization, that means no one has no leadership capability. If you're a 1,000-person organization, no one without leadership capability. A 10,000-person organization, no one without leadership capability. A 100,000-person organization, no one. You have to get to 1 million people to find one person with 0 leadership capability. In a country of 400 million people, that is 400 people. In other words, everybody has some leadership capability except for about 400 in this country. Go around the world, you find the same statistic. That means that this percent of people have it. Now, we talk about leadership with a small l, not with a capital L. I don't talk about positional leadership now. I'm talking about the kind of leadership that most people engage in and day out. If I were to ask you where your personal leadership role model, leader role model, not any role model, in your life, who would you say is the number 1 leader role model in your life? Anybody? Parents? So how many people would say it's a family member? It's going to be the majority of hands because 46% of people answer it that way. What's the second one on the list? Teacher or coach. 26% roughly say that. And the next on the list is a community member, religious leader, someone from the community if you're under 30. If you're over 30, the second place is a supervisor at work, usually someone you experience early on, followed by teacher or coach, and then followed by community member. If you look at the people who occupy political leadership positions, they're way down the list. Fortune 500 CEOs, way down the list in terms of leader role models. Now, what does that tell us about leadership? if most of us have as family members, followed by teacher, coach, as our most important leader role models in our life, when we were growing and developing and looking for those kinds of role models, what does that message tell us? Leadership is personal. It's about people who are close to us. Now, how many of you in this room are family members? All of us. That means to somebody, you are likely to be their number one leader role model. So there's no reason at all for us to ask the question, are we leaders or not? Because we all are to somebody. And wouldn't you, like Debbie, like to be considered by those who view you as their leader role model the best in the world? Whether it's as a parent, teacher, or a coach, a volunteer in a community activity, or somebody who's a manager in an organization. So that's the first point, is that leadership is everyone's business. It's something that people need and want. It's something that everybody has the capacity to execute, except for that 13 10,000ths of a point, that one person out of a million. Now, the issue is we all have the capability, but we're just not leading frequently enough. It is also true that those who exercise leadership more frequently, engage in exemplary practices more frequently, have better outcomes than those who engage in it less frequently. So if you exemplify what we call the 5 practices of exemplary leadership more often than those who exemplify them less often, you are more likely to get better results. So let's take a look at another question we ask. Compare worst leaders on people's list to best leaders on people's list. And we asked what percentage of talent is utilized by the worst leaders compared to the best leaders. So let's take a look at, first of all, least amount and most amount. Least amount for worst leaders, least amount for best leaders. As you can see, the least amount of talent utilized by worst leaders is 2. The least amount, however, by the best leaders is 40. The most amount for worst leaders is 40% versus 110% for the best. Now, we know that 110 is mathematically impossible. So how can you have 110? People told us, well, it's because they got out of me more than I thought I had. They drew more from me than even I knew I possessed. That's how they got the 110%. On average, the numbers look like this, 31.2 compared to about 95%. Now, which leader would you like to follow, most prefer to follow? The worst or the best? And that's why we all ought to have the aspiration of being, like Debbie said, the best in the world, because people will be able to utilize more of their talent and abilities when we are the best. So how do we become the best leaders in the world? We did, based on the research that we've done, we have isolated 5, and there may be more, important factors. The first of those is that you have to believe you can. Now, this may seem very obvious to all of us, that you obviously have to believe you can, but every time we get asked the question, are leaders born or made, we know there's a hint of doubt in there. And that you may be questioning yourself about whether you have this skill or ability. I love this slide. So Barry and I, independently of each other, were wandering around New Orleans during a conference that we were having there called the Leadership Challenge Forum, and we happened upon this art gallery which had this painting, and we each got separately, unknown to the other, a print of it. And here you have this cat, obviously staring at itself in the mirror and seeing this image of itself, but painting a self-portrait of a tiger. Now, you might have a couple reactions to this. One is this cat is kidding himself. He doesn't look anything like that picture. But yet to him, inside, he does. And how many times do we look at someone and just see the cat, but not the tiger. We make the assumption that because the person looks that way, maybe they don't have the capability, but yet they see themselves as having that capability. And our beliefs, our attitudes about the capacity of other people to lead strongly influences whether they do or don't. When we were working on this, we got an email from, we'll call her Jane Blake. She prefers for us not to use her real name, but it is a real person. And she wrote us an email. She says, I was in a class, imagine a leadership studies course, and I was studying with military officers and government officials and people who are managers in organizations, and I was only, and these are her words, mother, grandmother, and coal miner's daughter. And that's how she saw herself. That was her self-image. Imagine again the cat looking at itself in the mirror. And she said, initially I didn't see myself as having the capability to lead like the military officers and the government officials and the supervisors and managers. But then after studying leadership, I realized that maybe even I can become a leader. That's the kind of mental shift everyone needs to make in order to become one. Because if you don't believe you can, you can't. You have to start with your own self-belief. And Carol Dweck, I'm sure many of you are familiar with her work, Stanford University professor, has written a lot on mindset, fixed and growth. Growth mindset is essentially, I make the assumption that my skills and abilities, my talents are mutable. I can grow them. Even when I make a mistake and I don't do well, I can learn from it. Fixed mindset is you either have it or you don't. Well, it turns out that those who have a fixed mindset believe that talent is essentially inherited and you can only do what your God-given talents are. Don't learn well, don't become as effective as students in school or managers at work. You have to believe that you have the ability to change who you are in order to become as effective as you can be. So there's a lot of research behind this, and we're currently engaged in examining whether or not these attitudes are as true for leaders as they are for others in the population. And I invite any of you, if you're looking for a doctoral dissertation to do, to explore this possibility. So, first of all, you have to believe in yourself. And the other thing we learned about learning is that those with a growth mindset who are more engaged in learning become the best leaders. In independent research that Lillis Brown, Barry Posner, and I did, we found that those leaders who engage more frequently in learning activities, regardless of their learning style, maybe it's an experiential style, maybe it's a reflective style, maybe you want to observe and watch other people, whatever the style is, it doesn't matter. You can still learn to lead. You just have to engage in that style more frequently than others in order to become the best you can be. I'll say more about how frequently toward the end of my talk. But it is true then that the best learners make the best leaders. And so we know that it doesn't stop after this doctoral program. It doesn't stop after the leadership studies program. It doesn't stop after a weekend. It continues on every day, day in and day out. The best leaders are the best learners. So here's one little practical step you can take. At the beginning of every day, I invite you to remind yourself that you make a positive difference in the world. To just look in the mirror like that cat and say to yourself, today I'm going to make a difference in the lives of the people that I lead. And then ask yourself, well, how might I do that today? And you might also reflect on that at the end of the day, and what did I do today to have that kind of an impact on others? Engage in that kind of reflection. The second thing we need to do is aspire to excel. Some interesting research was done at the Military Academy. Tom Kouzes is now at Rice University directing their executive program, was at the Military Academy before retiring. And Tom, along with some other colleagues at the Military Academy, did something very interesting. They were able to study a population that had been through the same experience, about 10,000 graduates of West Point, had been through the same identical learning experience, very rare to be able to do this, from 4 to 10 years after graduation. And they looked at one thing in particular. They looked at how those initially cadets responded to questions about why they enrolled in West Point. And they were able to categorize the why, the answer to the question of why, into two basic categories: instrumental values and intrinsic or internal values. Now, an instrumental value would be something like, I joined the military academy because I wanted to get a better job after I did my service. Or I expected to get paid more because I attended here, or I went to a school with a prestigious name. Those who are intrinsic or internal values said, I want to become the best leader I can be, or I want to serve the country. Then they tracked them in terms of their success in their military careers during their service over a 4 to 10 year period of time. Those who scored highest on internal or intrinsic values did the best compared to those who had external reasons for enrolling in the military academy. And surprisingly, when you combine the two, instrumental and the external reasons and the internal reasons, they did even worse. This raises an important question for all of us who are involved in leadership development. What do we tell people is the reason why they should enroll? Do we tell them that you should enroll because you'll get a higher paying job, you'll get promoted? Those are extrinsic reasons, which only means that you are going to predict that they will not do as well as those who are told, the reason why we are doing this for you is so you can become the best leader you can be. You can serve the company or the country in a way that you couldn't if you didn't have this developmental experience. But what do we do inside corporations? We tell them that if you engage in this leadership program, high potential program, you may get selected to be one of those people who gets to be in the highest positions of the organization. Well, guess what? You're only making them worse, not better. They should be doing it because they want to do it to become the best and because they want to serve the company or the country. Powerful stuff. Those with intrinsic or internal reasons for becoming better leaders end up doing better than those who do it for external reasons. And of course, we have to think longer term. I love this one too. Kind of looks like me, don't you think? So Jim, where do you see yourself in 10 minutes? Probably not quite, a few more than 10. I'll be on my way to the airport. But other than that, we know that leaders have to be longer term oriented. 10 minutes is not enough. We have to think about the future, which is one of the things that Kelly McGonigal from Stanford found in some research that she wrote about in The Upside of Stress, where she said students now who completed an exercise essentially around how do you envision yourself into the future. They called it beyond self-reflection, beyond the self-reflection. Those who thought about the meaning and significance of the work that they did long term persisted longer and ended up finishing more problems correctly than those who were even given a neutral or just pay attention to in the moment what's going on. So when we think about the meaning and significance of our work long term, the benefit it brings to other people and to ourselves, we're more likely to persist longer, and we're also better able to solve immediate problems. So this notion of being forward-looking, of having a vision of the future, of seeing yourself doing better in the future helps us persist in the present, as well as it helps us to solve more difficult problems and situations. So here's another action item for you. Imagine it's 10 years from now, and you're being awarded Leader of the Year. All of you. You're Leader of the Year, and colleague, friend, family member comes up to the podium and talks about the impact that they have had on you. They talk about the lessons they learned from you, the ideals you stood for, the feelings they had when they were around you, or the evidence that you had had an impact on the world or on them personally. What would you hope they'd be saying about you? I encourage you to do that exercise and not just do it once, but do it frequently. Because that's, again, a self-reflection about the impact you're having on others, the meaning and significance, as well as your aspirations for yourself. You have to aspire to excel if you want to become the best in the world, as Debbie said. The third thing we need to do is we need to challenge ourselves. One of the things we learned from our leadership personal best research is we asked people to tell us stories about the time when they did their best as leaders. And what was interesting about those cases was that every single one of them had to do with a challenge, difficulty, adversity. For one woman, she wrote about how her company was destroyed in an earthquake and she had to rebuild the entire business. For another young person, it was how they were selected to be a leader for the kind of one of the youngest managers in the organization, and everyone said, "You're too young to lead." Or another woman who was in China, who was assigned she was in a publishing company, and what she discovered is that in China is that the bookstore shelves were bare. Case after case after case was about doing something for the first time, like Arlene Blum, who was the first woman to lead a team of all women to the top of Annapurna. Doing something for the first time, doing something that was challenging and difficult, doing something no one had ever done before. Now, what's also interesting is that when you look at the best conditions under which people learn, it's also about challenge. We don't learn things when it's easy. We learn things when it's difficult. Why? Because when it's easy, we're just using the skills we already have, the capacity you already have. When it's difficult, we're having to pull something else out of ourselves that we couldn't do before. Stretch a new muscle. Build a new strength. So challenge is not only critical to leading, it's also critical to learning. It's taking a foreign assignment. It's going to a different city. It's taking on a project for the organization. It's doing something that is in a function that you'd never worked in before. So how do we challenge ourselves on a regular basis to continuously learn and develop and grow? Kaylee Adair, now at the University of Alabama, was a high school student when we first interviewed out of Colorado. And she made this comment to us when we were corresponding. She said one of her favorite things about human beings is that they're never satisfied with their condition. We are never satisfied with our condition. If we ever become satisfied with our condition, we're in decline. I do not want satisfied people in an organization. I want dissatisfied people. Not unhappy people, dissatisfied people. Meaning, we could do better, if only. We could do better if only we were serving the customer better. We could do better if only we could come to agreement with each other. We could do better if. Those are the kind of people who make better leaders. They're always dissatisfied. I love this comment because this is really gets at the core of the issue. We often talk about engagement as if it's an opportunity to make everyone somehow satisfied with everything that's going on. Why do we want to do that? Why don't we want people to be a little, like we could do better around here? That's the kind of attitude we need to have if we're going to learn and grow over time. This is one of those individuals who wasn't satisfied. It's the man in the white polo shirt in the middle. His name is Don Bennett. He lives in Seattle, Washington. He was the first amputee to climb Mount Rainier, 14,410 feet on one leg and two crutches. Now, I had the opportunity, wonderful opportunity to interview Don years ago, stay in touch with him still. And when he was on that mountain about 30 years ago, he actually had to go up twice to Mount Rainier because after 14,000 feet, snow came in, he had to go down, blizzard, had to go back up again, that last 410 feet. And I asked Don what was the most important lesson he learned from climbing that mountain. He said, "You can't do it alone." We'll talk about that in just a moment. But then he said, you know, when I came down off that mountain, I was in the best physical shape I'd ever been in my life. And I asked myself, what am I going to do with myself? I got to do something with myself physically, but also with other people. What is it that I'm going to do? So he was out in the backyard with his kids, and they were playing basketball, and they shot a basket, and the ball dribbled down to his feet. So it's one good foot. And he just instinctively kicked it with his one good foot. And then a light bulb went off in his head, and he said, I wonder if other amputees might be able to kick a ball. So he went inside the house, picked up the phone, and he said, called up a number of his amputee friends, and he said, I want you all to come to the park, and we're going to kick the ball around. And that was the beginning of the Amputee Soccer League. This is Don with one of the leagues in Mexico, Jalisco, Mexico. And his aim, his ambition, he's about 2 countries away, last I talked to him, of qualifying this as an Olympic sport in the Paralympic Games. He's constantly challenging himself and others to do something that they didn't think they could do. Because when you ask him what his vision is, it's not to climb to the top of Mount Rainier. It's to show other individuals who maybe are disabled that they can do more than they think they can. That's where the learning is. When people believe that they can do more than they think they can and challenge themselves, like Don asked them to do better. Now, of course, when we do that, we sometimes fail. J.K. Rowling, in a graduation speech at Harvard, made this comment. You know, she commented that it's impossible to live without failing. Unless, of course, you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you have failed by default. As leaders, we need to encourage failure in ourselves and in others. Not because we want people to fail per se, but we want them to learn when they do, because it's inevitable. So whether you're J.K. Rowling or whether you're Don Bennett or Angela Duckworth at University of Pennsylvania, who's done research on grit, another subject which I think is extremely important for us to study in leadership studies. It's this whole notion of grit. Grit, as Angela defines it, is persistence in pursuit of a passion. So it's about keeping going, even though you face difficulties, because you're pursuing something that is important to you. She's coming out with a new book in about a month on grit, and she's done some seminal research on students who are in spelling bee competitions, students in school, military academy cadets, and found that those who score higher on grit are much more likely to be successful in their life and in school than those who score lower on grit. One of the concerns I have currently in what we're seeing in our data is that while those with higher grit do better, it's becoming too easy not to persist in the pursuit of a passionate purpose. Why? Because it's too easy for you to get help. Now, I'm going to talk about the importance of help in a moment, but let me explain. Stanford University professor wrote a book on millennials because he was noticing something in the entering students at his university. He was noticing that they weren't as independent in their thought as earlier students entering the university. One example he gives is of a young man who was entering as a freshman, moving into his dorm. His parents had dropped him off. He was sitting there on the street with his belongings, and there was something that was too heavy for him to carry up to his room by himself. What do you think he did? He called his mother on his mobile phone. He called his mother on his mobile phone and said, I can't get this up to my room. What do I do? What? You call your mother when you can't get a box up to your room? Well, he uses that as an illustration. And I have a son who's 27, so believe me, I'm well aware of these issues. And this is not a put down of millennials. What it is essentially a warning to all of us as parents that when our kids need help, the best thing to do is to say, I know you'll figure it out. You know, if you really get in trouble and the cops have you in the police station and you need bail, give me a call. Otherwise, you'll figure it out. You know, I got this box here. What do I do? Well, maybe there's like 10,000 other students who could help me. Maybe there's an RA in a dorm I could call. We need to be able to help our young people face challenges in their lives in ways that they learn how to do it without their parents' involvement. Become independent in thought in dealing with these challenges. Sorry if I have insulted anyone in this room at the moment, but it's really a subject about which we feel passionately because we know that those with grit, passion, and persistence in pursuit of a purpose do better in their lives than those who don't. So here's another application for you. So answer this particular question for yourself. What's the next step in my own leadership development that is both important to me? That's the meaning and significance, the passion and pursuit of a meaningful purpose that is challenging to me, that's really going to stretch me. And what can I do to engage in that? Now, I still have time for the last two parts and some brief questions. Let me just stop. I've got a couple more things to say. But anyone have any comments, questions, or observations at this point? Or emotional outbursts? Please, in the back.
So what you said earlier, you were saying that the parents should try to push their kids out, let them solve it on their own. And I was wondering if there's a cultural dynamic to that, an ethnic cultural dynamic. I know with African American families, they help their children. There's not like 18, you're on your own, whereas other cultures might do that. So is it bad for the parents to always be there? I'm not that example. That example was, you need to figure it out. But is that a bad thing to always kind of guide them and kind of give them hints? Or should you just totally be like, I think you know?
Well, you've cued me for the next part of my talk. So I'm going to defer that until the next. I'm going to immediately talk about that. Let me just see if there are any other questions, and I will answer that. Any other comments, questions about anything you said so far? Yes, please.
What was Don's last name?
Bennett, Bennett. Lovely man, wonderful human being, great leader, great role model. All right, let me respond to this question by saying, now, not to necessarily contradict myself, but one of the things that's true of successful people is that they have support all along the way. So I think there's a difference between solving a problem for somebody else and offering them support. And so I think perhaps we reframe that to say it is important and necessary to provide support all along the way. But that support can also involve helping people develop the problem-solving skills so they can be independent in thought and action. And so culturally, I think perhaps we're not as far apart as what my statement might make it seem to be. That when you take a look at Benjamin Bloom's work, for example, who followed young people in music and art and math and other subjects, looking at those who became very competent, highly expert at their work, or Anders Ericsson's work on expertise, you'll find that unless there's been some intensive process of encouragement, nurturance, education, and training, all along the way, people tend not to develop the highest levels of competence that they can develop. So it's absolutely necessary for people who become expert to be able to have that kind of nurturance and support. Now, I find it really interesting that elite athletes, when they get an award, or Academy Award winners, when they accept the award, say something to the effect that, and I could not have done this alone, I'd like to thank. And yet, how many CEOs have you ever heard say that? I could not have gotten here where I am. I'd like to thank my coach. Every athlete I know has 2 or 3 coaches, professional athlete. They got a trainer. They got a physio. They got a couple of coaches that work with them. We need to develop that same ethic and that same model with executives who are going through leadership development, that it's valuable and important and necessary to have fans, have coaches, have trainers, have people who are mentors and guides all along the way in order to become the best you can be. And you also have to have role models. Al Bender at Stanford has suggested that modeling is the first step to developing competency. If you can't see an exemplary role model of what it is you're trying to develop, then it's hard to imagine in your mind how somebody can do this at a high level of competence. So we all have to find ourselves role models for the kinds of leadership behavior we're aspiring to. And I mentioned this to some colleagues earlier. Pity the leader caught between unloving critics and uncritical lovers. Howard Gardner made that comment. Howard wrote the book On Leadership. His former Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare in the Johnson administration, served 5 presidents of the United States. One of the best scholars on this, best thinkers and scholars on this topic of leadership. And I find this wonderful. People who are sycophants, who always say that everything you do is wonderful, are not helpful to our growth and development. People who always criticize everything we do and nothing we do is ever good enough or ever right and everything is wrong are not helpful because we shut them out. We can't be that bad. It's only loving critics that help us grow and develop. And in our lives, we need to have people who can say to us, I care a lot about you. I love you. But let me give you some honest feedback. You need to know that. Fill in the blank. We all need somebody like that we can turn to for honest, direct feedback, knowing that that person has no agenda other than to help us, other than to be there to help us grow and develop. So here's another action item for you. Who would be on your personal board of directors? If you were going to select a board of directors to offer support, counsel, guidance, and help, who would be on that board? Think about a personal board of directors for yourself. And as you're going through this leadership studies program or back in your jobs, think about who you would want to have as someone who would offer you training, offer you counseling, offer you advice, offer you support, be there as a shoulder to lean on, someone to give you feedback. Identify those people as you are going through these programs of development so that you have them ready to call on. And give them a call ahead of time and tell them, you're now on my personal board of directors. And I may be giving you a call every now and then for some help. And the last piece is you have to practice deliberately. Anders Ericsson, who is the leading expert on expertise in this country, probably in the world, said that based on his research, the differences between expert performers and normal adults reflect a lifelong period of deliberate practice. Lifelong period of deliberate practice. Now, this is our son, Nick. Nick is now 27. He works in Hollywood, but he got a scholarship to play tennis at UC Davis when he was an undergrad. Played 4 years, #1, singles and doubles for 3 of the 4. Yes, we're very proud of Nick. But I use him as an example because when he was being recruited to play in college, we went and interviewed a lot of coaches. And we asked them about, what's the routine? Tell us about the day in the life of a tennis player at your university. How many hours do they practice? Do they have like special opportunities for tutors and study? And tell us about their practice routine. And Glenn Michibata, of Princeton University at the time, in response to the question about practice, says, I tell my players that they have to practice 2 hours a day just to stay the same, more if they want to get better. 2 hours a day just to stay the same, more if they want to get better. Anyone in here, like Nick, get a scholarship to play sports at university? Any of you have kids who... So how many hours a day was the practice? 4. For elite players, it's usually anywhere, low end is 2, high end could be 4 or 5. I had the opportunity to interview Long Long, the concert pianist from China. I asked him the same question. He says, by the way, I hate that question, but I'll tell you the answer. How many hours a day do you practice? And he said, when I was first starting out, when I was, which was 3 years old, I was practicing 4 or 5 hours a day. Now I only practice 3. Now that I'm a performer. Every elite performer in the world practices some number of hours every day. How many executives do you know who practice, not play, practice 2 hours a day? 0. Well, not quite 0. Probably 0.00013. Why? Well, I don't have 2 more hours in my day. I work hard enough as it is. All true. We are not advocating adding 2 more hours onto your day. We are suggesting that there are ways to reframe your day so that you can find 15 minutes here and 15 minutes there to practice. When you go into a meeting, it's a routine meeting, right? How do you make it a practice field? I say to my team, or to a coach who might be sitting in the back of the room, today in this meeting I'm going to practice active listening. And at the end of the meeting, this lasts an hour, I will have practiced active listening. And I would like you to give me some feedback on how I did. That's practice. You have a goal to improve in a certain area. You have a designed learning experience, a meeting in which you're going to practice. You have some way of getting feedback at the end of the meeting, and you have somebody there for support. How can we turn our organizations into practice fields, not just playing fields? It's a challenge, but we need to reframe how we think about development. It's not just something you do in a class, not just something you do on weekends or in evenings. It's something you can do during your 8, 10, 12 hours of your workday. Turn our playing fields into practice fields. And Marshall Goldsmith commented that you will not get better if you do not follow up. This is very true. Unless we apply what we learn, or we were talking earlier today, in Jesuit, St. Ignatius once said, to know and not to do is not to know. To know and not to do is not to know. So we really don't know until we do. So we have to apply it back on the job. We have to follow up our learning. So how are we doing that? One suggestion on what we can do is at the end of each day, record your answer to this question. What did I do today to improve so that I'm a better leader today than I was yesterday? Just reflect on that question. Spend 15 minutes or so at the end of every day, or maybe you prefer to do it in the morning when you first wake up. Maybe you prefer to do it in the middle of the day, whenever, but take some time to reflect on what have I done in the last 24 hours to improve so I'm better now than I was 24 hours ago. Now, I want to summarize here very briefly, and let me just take about one question or two if you have it, and then I'll close. Comments, questions? Thank you all very much for this opportunity to be with you. If you do have any comments or questions, please send me an email. I'll be delighted to answer them. It may take me a little while, but I will get back to you. And thank you all. I just want to say again how much I appreciate what Gonzaga University is doing to develop leaders. We need better leaders in the world, and Gonzaga is one of those few places on the planet that's dedicating itself to doing that. So thank you for this opportunity to be with you. And let me just summarize that there are 5 things I think we need to do. We need to believe that we can become leaders, better leaders. We need to aspire to excel. We need to challenge ourselves. We need to engage the support we need, and we need to practice deliberately if we're going to make that happen. And again, another person from Washington State, Jim Whittaker, first American to climb Mount Everest, commented in his memoir. I had the great pleasure of being able to work with Jim over the years, former CEO of REI, one of the first employees of REI. When asked about, why is it that you do all of the adventuring that you do, he said, it's about making the most of every moment, about stretching your own boundaries, about being willing to learn constantly and putting yourself in situations where learning is possible. So he sails from Washington to Australia not for the adventure. He climbs Mount Everest not just for the adventure, but for the learning. And so my wish for and hope for you is what Jim's wish would also be, Jim Whittaker's wish, which would be that you always challenge yourself to learn. Love him and lead him. Thank you all very much for the opportunity. Thank you. Thank you all.